if you want to
Mm,
see how like improving resolution against a certain ticket type, well, that requires someone to manually tag all these things, and then build the help center document, throw it out there, train everyone to know how to use it, and then maybe wait a month and see if it like made a difference. And I think the time cycles of that are now much more shortened and hopefully a lot more legible, if we sort of adopt more of like a systems mindset to testing it, just like software engineering has.
Welcome to the CX Files. Today's guest is Arthur Wu. He's the co founder of Dataland, which builds AI agents for customer support teams that search your internal systems for you. Before working on internal tools for customer support, he spent 4 years at Palantir and also co founded and led several startups, going back to 2013 when he started his first business in Charlottesville, Virginia. Arthur, welcome.
Thanks, Ben. It's awesome to be on.
So I want to jump right in and ask you a little bit about some of the early days in your career. And when you first got started, what are some of the first things that you learned about customer experience, good or bad?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is one of those things where I guess like all of us are are customers of some business at some point, and then at someday you just kind of think about like, oh, like was my experience with it like good or bad? Which I guess sounds kind of obvious, but I think like once after I graduated college and my first job was at Palantir, I think this really came across even on like my first project ever, which was my and it's actually where I met my now co-founder Howard, but we got sent to Fiat Chrysler in Detroit. And the whole goal was, how do you better understand what's going on wrong with the car? Because I don't know if you have had to take a car into a dealership to get something fixed, but it's like an experience that obviously no one likes. And it's extremely confusing because like your check engine light will turn on and then a mechanic will be like, cool, that's like $6,000, like yada yada, and you don't even know whether to trust the whole experience, and it's really frustrating. But believe it or not, automakers take this problem really seriously, and there are like thousands of engineers, assembly line workers, like team leaders, like all dedicated trying to figure out how do we make like a high quality car. And so when you kind of go into the dealership and ask the question, like, why is my engine making a weird noise? And, like, can you fix it? I think implicit in that is, a pretty simple customer question, but it kind of like spins off this mountain of work. So I think like the most surprising thing was sometimes customer questions, even if they're super simple, are extremely hard to actually answer, especially at scale, especially depending on how complex your product is. And at a place like Palantir, really the focus was on how do you take all this data that we have about, the assembly line process and even telemetry, like if you opted in, like on your vehicle, that gets sent back to the manufacturer, so you could better, decode and understand what's going on. So it kind of turned to this like much more complex like technical troubleshooting problem as well. Later on to the fact that like all these different mechanics across the country that don't even work for the OEM, like also have to figure out a way to like fix this car better for the customer. So I think TLDR is really like data is so much more important to the customer experience than I realized. And it's not just like a monitoring visibility thing. It's like, no, it's like, do people even have the tools they need to actually debug something really complicated that could be going on? So yeah, Palantir is super formative for that. I was really thankful for that experience.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, Palantir is one of these businesses that is just got such a reputation for solving hard problems. And I think if you could tell us a little bit more, I mean, I know there's probably some NDAs and some other things going on, but just generally speaking, like what was the perspective over there about customer experience, and like how did the were there some thoughts or sort of philosophy around that at that company?
For sure. I mean, I think it's interesting because the word like customer experience, like it would come up sometimes, like that phrase would come up sometimes, but a lot of times it was like the head of operations that like said like, oh yeah, like our customers like hate it when like this XYZ thing happens, or I don't know, like an insurance company, like when they're adjusting a loan, like or sorry, adjusting a policy, like how like long does that take, like or not, like to get back to the customer. And they may not use the words like customer experience to describe that, but I do think the overall goal at the end of the day, like usually meant like operationally, like we have to improve something to make our customers feel happier and for the business to be more successful.
Hmm.
And that was almost at least on the commercial side of Palantir, that was almost always like the focus. Sometimes like the projects would be like very far like upstream of like maybe reaching a downstream customer. So working for like an oil and gas company, in that case, like they might need to better understand like sand that might be getting into oil wells, like for example. That's obviously like very far apart from like the end customer experience that we might, think of that phrase today. But I think the important thing was that someone at that company had this belief that if we use data better to improve that experience, it's like at some point down the line, the customer will ultimately benefit, whether it's frankly like cheaper gas prices, like in that case, or like more like which would probably like be like the best way for that to sort of manifest.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's interesting. I feel like this phrase customer experience is like it kind of means something a little bit different to everybody, like I think. But I do think the common truth is just like, uh, I guess ironically it goes back to the name. Like, is the customer having a good experience and are you doing everything to make that happen?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of terms that get used in business where it does almost vary the definition from company to company or even department to department. Um, Yeah, there's a range of things that feed into that, like you're describing. It could be, sand getting into the oil, literally, or it could be, somebody feeling a little bit of friction in their, personal experience as an end user, right? If you're, at the pump and the machine doesn't reliably start when you put the nozzle into your gas tank or something, right? There could be a lot of different aspects of that. If it's a web business, or you're interfacing with the business via the web, there's all these little points of friction that can come up. Um, and just things that are confusing or just psychologically kind of taxing, right? It requires you to put in some effort to think about, okay, well, where do I get the answer that I'm actually looking for? Um, so I want to ask about that. Like when you're thinking about the customer experience, the end user experience at Dataland, like what are some of the things that you're really focused on optimizing and getting right?
Yeah, I think that for us, our customer really is like the customer support team, which I actually think might change in the coming few years because I think this is a whole other rabbit hole that we could follow down. I don't think what support looks like today will look like what it looks like maybe 5 years from now, like sort of a thing. But today, when we think about the customer support agent as our customer, we really put our hats on and think about what are the most time consuming like annoying menial parts like of someone's day. To give you an example, so we have like a Copilot product which will basically look at incoming customer messages and scan that message for key details, and it can like work in like whatever help desk you're using is just a Chrome extension actually. And based on the information it finds, it'll like look up a bunch of information depending on what the ticket mentions, depending on who that customer is. And so there's this one like kind of menial flow, still very important, that every customer support agent had to do, which at this one customer, which was, when someone they're like a B2B business, and so whenever someone writes in, you have to capture, who that person is, what's their plan status, like do they have an active subscription, what workspace are they part of, what role do they have on that workspace, have they filed any tickets recently in the past, like 3 months that have been, maybe a potentially worse CSAT? And so that sort of step to like go and research all those, data points, I don't know, it can take anywhere from like five, like I don't know, what 2 to 5 minutes. But when you're dealing with dozens of tickets a day, it really adds up. It's pretty annoying. And I think in that space where it's like, okay, well, 2 to 5 minutes a day, who cares? Like a CFO might come in and say, okay, well, like whatever, just like deal with it. I think what's been really exciting is that there really is an opportunity to make like someone's life like better because like 2 to 5 minutes a day per interaction, sure, but that quickly adds up to like hours a day. And so for us, I think something we really pay close attention to is, let's just like watch what your workflow looks like. And, a lot of times we'll just spend like a few hours with even just one person just watching, like, hey, like, just show me how you would handle XYZ thing. And we'll just kind of make mental notes of, okay, well, this looks really frustrating. Like, there's so many steps to this SOP, for example, that you might have to follow that invariably you might skip a few if you don't think they're important. Like, those are the things that we kind of pay attention to. So we kind of adopt a like much more like user research type approach to it first to make sure we stay close to it. And I think that's one of the most exciting things, especially building an earlier stage startup. Like you really get to take the time to deeply understand what even an individual person at a company might be going through, because chances are it does generalize pretty well to other folks in the same role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's always a difference between um, quantitative and qualitative, right? And you can measure and measure and measure, and you have a whole stack of metrics. But if you sit down and watch a screen video, or if you and look over somebody's shoulder, you're always going to pick up on some things that are not in the data, right?
Yes, 100%. To the point where, like, I have, like even just, like, I think our first call ever with, like, a customer support, like, specialist, it was, like, an hour-long video, but then my co-founder and I, like, rewatched it maybe 5 times. Like, we literally spent half the day just, like, watching the same episode of, like, here's how someone has to do their job today. One of the most enlightening things we could possibly do, because, like, there's, like, like even just like watching where someone like hovers their cursor over and then like says, "Oh wait, never mind. Actually, I don't need to do that." Or even seeing how many tabs they have open on their screen and why they're checking them. I mean, there are crazy things that I feel like we got to learn. Like almost every person we talk to, especially if it's a SaaS product, has like a really annoying impersonation user flow where it's like, okay, well, I have to like spin up totally new Chrome profiles in Windows to just like pretend to be this user, but I can't log in this way or else it'll log me out of everything else. It's just like stuff like that. It's like you don't learn that unless you actually just watch someone do their job. And they probably won't even tell you about it either because it just like at that point, it's just like it doesn't feel important enough to mention. But that's exactly the sort of thing that we have to understand if we're actually going to build good products for people that people like to use at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right, and I think that there's something to be said for the human aspect of building things and of providing services, and there's also this technical aspect, right? And it's the merger of the two. Um, when you think about this generally, in customer support, a lot of it is okay. We have this efficiency target we're trying to hit. We're trying to get our average resolution time down. We're trying to get our tickets per agent to a certain number. Um, and there's a lot of these kind of efficiency drives and efficiency incentives, obviously cost savings for the business, right? But there's also this longer term view that if you build a relationship with a customer, if you really understand what they need, you really give them personalized service, then they're going to keep coming back and you're going to get that recurring revenue. You're going to get, the repeat purchases, the longer, larger lifetime value. How do you think about that sort of balance for at Dataland and also just generally in the business space?
Totally. I think for us, I think that's why I think like using the term customer experience can kind of flatten. This is kind of, I'm going to get on a soapbox here. I think when people use the term customer experience, in some ways, it kind of flattens what everyone's expectations like of what like best practices should be at like every single company, which I think is really an incorrect way to sort of approach that. For example, I think like an e-commerce company can frankly get away with like much more of a transactional approach to their customer support. I think there's some exceptions. Like obviously, I think like airlines are a big exception. But if it's something where it's like, yeah, like I will buy like a sweater from this one company one time, and that's I probably don't expect to buy a ton of clothes from them in the future. I think that's totally fine to have a different expectation of what customer experience should look like in that context versus something like a B2B SaaS company, where I think that sort of relationship is much more important to invest in. And it's not because, the B2B company naturally cares more. I think it's just like the surface area of the interaction that a customer could have with the B2B vendor is just much bigger than it could be with like a lot of e-commerce or, like direct like B2C companies in that way. And so I think when it comes to and of course like it actually is much more conducive for, like recurring revenue. And I think that, when it comes to that, like, that's where, like I don't know, I'm sure someone's had the conversation of, like, does customer support just, like, converge on customer success, like, in the long term? Like, and if I could wave a magic wand, should every customer support role be a customer success role? I'm not sure about that, what I do think is that I do think, like, the attitude of, like, I'm actually just gonna, really think about, like, my I don't know, what would it take for like a customer to be really successful with us? Even that question is not a question that like customer support folks like often start with. But and so I think like where we actually see a lot of like the right mindset happening really isn't these B2B contexts at the end of the day, where you kind of expect someone to know like, oh yeah, like I know all the ticks you've had with us in the past. Like I know what you talked about like in the past with us. I know what's frustrating for you. I know what your priorities are in like the next few quarters. I know like, like what maybe even reading between the lines, like what you're not saying, because like I've just like tried to empathize with your position, like and what goal you're trying to achieve much more than it would be in a more transactional sort of relationship. So I think like that's where the balance like shines the most. It's like efficiency versus like empathy. Actually, it makes sense. Like the they dovetail together really nicely in the B2B context. I think the B2C one, I think that's the spicy one, like right now. It's like, do you feel happy when if an AI chatbot gets back to you with, a regular answer or it's like a help center answer? Like maybe, maybe not. I mean, like I think a lot of times, yes, but I think what we're trying to figure out, and this is kind of our bet as a company, is if it was smarter and had like more personal, like account specific information and knowledge about you, I think that's the bet where you can have that both blend of like empathy and efficiency to be a bit more. Um, and so, um, and so that's what we're excited about in the next few years too. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a range of, if you have a full spectrum of customer needs ranging from super simple, how do I reset my password type of things, to, here's an edge case of an edge case of an edge case. I really need personalized answers for this. Um, where do you see the opportunity for these different tools and different approaches?
Yeah, I think like what we're seeing today, I mean, even if we like kind of had the same conversation a year ago, I feel like I think people would be skeptical that like folks would want to talk with an AI chatbot to like get an answer to something as simple as like a password reset. I think now, I think everyone seems cool with it. Like honestly, where it's like, oh yeah, like I asked a straightforward question, I got a straightforward answer.
Hmm.
And there's definitely these 80-20 dynamics, like you mentioned, like, the very long tail type question versus ones that you get all the time. I think that there's a bigger gray area like in between things. Even I mean, even for like an e-commerce business where like, where's my order might be like the most common question that you might get. But like, I don't know, there can be a gradient of like satisfying to very dissatisfying answers about that. The most dissatisfying is like, hey, it's still processing, which the customer could have probably known if they just like that's like the information they might have already had in the first place. They go to their dashboard, they see like, oh yeah, the order is still in transit. What they really want to happen is like have someone from that like e-commerce company reach out to like a carrier like USPS, UPS, like whatever, like actually get the tea, if you will, on like what's actually going on with their order, and then get back to them that way. And so I think that like there is like it's almost like a treadmill of what customers expect like going forward. I think like everyone's cool with like the password reset. I think there's a good opportunity to like actually like more deeply involve like better answers to those like typical questions like over time, especially if like data is more in the play. And I think in the future it might even look like, some sort of like agent that's like doing this coordination problem for you, like potentially. In this case, calling USPS, like whatever. So yeah, I guess my answer to that is like I think it's a bit of a treadmill. I think it's like in terms of like there's like a sliding window of expectations like on this over time. But right now, I think most there's that cool like intercom like report the other day that I read on like the 2025 trends for like customer service, which take a vendor report with a grain of salt. But it did make sense to me. It was like, it was like, I forget the specific statistic, but I think both support leaders and also consumers were much more willing to like have AI, or said that like they were much more satisfied with the AI type experiences in the past year, which is not something I necessarily predicted like, a few years ago, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, this AI wave, I mean, it's everywhere now. I mean, every business, if a business says we have AI, I'm like, okay, great. It's like saying you have electricity, at this point, right? Um, and I think that the differences in the approaches are really starting to become more and more important, right? Anybody can plug in to an LLM, anybody can, call an API, and build something. But like, why, why are some going to become the winners and some are not, right? And that's something obviously we're thinking about at Helpfeel as well. But I wonder, how do you think about this as far as like, you know, if it's such a level playing field, so to speak, for AI opportunity for building something, um, what are the opportunities to get an unfair advantage, or what's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I'd be super curious for your thoughts on this too. I think the way that we see like unfair advantages, um, there are a few things. I think the first one is actually building an agent that is contextual to the business that you're building it for. I think that any vendor that comes in and says like, "Hey, like, we'll put an AI agent, it'll learn everything, and it'll be great from day one," is and that might happen one day, but I don't think it's today because I think that there's so many hidden like business rules, data source, even just like doing the data integration where it's like, does my AI agent can it talk to my CRM? Can it talk to my ERP? Can it talk to all these different databases? Can it talk to our internal wiki of like all these rules that we have that we don't feel comfortable putting on a formal help center document yet in the public, but is something and like that, like all of our internal agents know. Like, can it check over all of our SOPs? I think the first one of the unfair advantage is how willing are you to sort of build the AI agent around the context of your actual business? Like, how willing are you able to deeply ground it? I think that's one piece. I think the second piece is like steerability. Like, how do
Mm,
you make it so that, um, you know, uh, if you could design like your perfect like watchtower, if you will, of like, all the generations that the AI bot is doing, and you could also have a good way to evaluate it, score it, like have it learn again. I think that sort of admin user experience becomes a lot more important. Um, and so I think that's a whole nother sort of like discipline and skill, I think, that a lot of support teams may not even have really today, because I just don't. It's like such a new role, like really, like how do you like if you're in charge of overseeing the AI agent that can like serve lots of customers at scale, how do you steer the system effectively? And so I think building software that makes it easier to steer your software, which sounds kind of meta, is actually really important. And then I feel like the third one is going to be around, like, how do you I think it really is, like, how do you have the right people, like, with it? Which is not a problem that a business can necessarily solve. I think it's something that, the customer experience, discipline at large, like, has to figure out how to lean into. But I think that someone's skill that might look like maybe the knowledge manager, like, on a customer support team, might actually become a lot more technical. And it's not necessarily like you have to learn how to code, but rather, like, you should be thinking about your overall like support as a system, not just a static like document base, but rather, oh hey, like we got a bunch of questions like this, like how based on this, and we don't have like coverage within our knowledge base, that should be the next thing that we write about next, like sort of a thing, which already is happening today, of course. But I do think there will be more. There has to be much more AI literacy, I think, at the end of the day, for people to know how to like meaningfully steer the software to be better. So yeah, first two things are like how do you differentiate, but I think the third thing is more so, like how do you like these systems are so new, but like we need people, to have the way to sort of climb the ladder to like gain those skills to know how to steer those systems. But I love your thoughts on this too. Like obviously I know you have a ton of perspective on this at Help Y'all.
yeah, well, thank you. I don't usually have a chance to talk in these episodes, and I'm mostly interested in hearing what you have to say and hearing what the guests have to say. But yeah, I'll share a little bit about it. I think there's a few pieces for us as well, and we found some things that work really well. And just a few personal thoughts about AI here, also to start with. I think one is that AI is not a solution; it's a tool, right? And that's kind of a really important thing, I think, for people to understand. Like, if you're buying an AI product, what is the outcome that you actually get done with it? Because it's not a result in itself, and it's just like all tools. It's about how do you use it, how do you maintain it, right? Where does it work the best? I mean, I could eat a shovel. I could use a shovel to eat soup, but it's not the best way to eat soup, right? So like there's tools that are purpose made for specific jobs, right? And AI is one of these just really general purpose tools. Maybe you could compare it to like a knife in a kitchen, right? I mean, there's a ton of things you can do with a knife in a kitchen beyond just like chopping vegetables or something, right? Um, so that's the kind of the first perspective that I like to take is okay, you've got AI, great, yeah, everybody does. What does it actually do for the business? What are the results? How measurable is it? And then the other part of that, measurability feeds into, one of the big specialties, and one of the things we really focus on in Helpfeel is the improvement process. So you mentioned this a little bit, but there's more of a technical point of view of, okay, you've got a certain result. Let's say you've deployed a tool, you're happy, you think you're happy with it, but like, what are the opportunities to continuously improve that? What does that process look like? And so
Totally.
this is not even unique to AI, but it's just having a business process in place that's reliable, that's consistent, that's clear for everybody involved, and it enables you to kind of move that iteration cycle around reliably. Um,
Totally. Yeah.
so
That's a
those
great
are two
point.
of the big ones for us. Yeah.
I think like, and I think to your last point, I think that there's something around like bringing like the principles of like software engineering into more fields where things get a bit more systematized. And what I mean by that is even as you mentioned, like how do you maintain something over time? Well, it kind of implies a few things. Like one, you need a way to accurately like isolate, track, and spin up like new experiments, like measure their progress. Deploy those changes like to a production environment and ways. I think in the support analog world, it's almost like, okay, well, maybe we do this with live customer tickets or we back test against tickets in terms of like testing generations of like responses, like for example. Um and uh and so and and so that way like it's sensible of how we're sort of adopting incremental changes to the system like over time, which I think today would be hard to think of in a really traditional support context, because it's like, okay, well, what is the value of this like one help center document doing? Well, okay, maybe you wait for like the usage analytics or the web traffic to that help center, like I don't know, a month later, and hope and cross your fingers that something worked. I think we're in a very different world right now where you could have that. The main user of that actually could be an LLM, like instead. And then you could instantly see whether or not it's actually solving more tickets of that certain type or not. Um, and I think what's prevented the traditional support from kind of adopting these more like productized ways of improving like the system, I think it's just because there's so much manual work involved. It's like if you want to
Mm.
see how like improving resolution against a certain ticket type, well, that requires someone to manually tag all these things, and then build the help center document, throw it out there, train everyone to know how to use it, and then maybe wait a month and see if it like made a difference. And I think the time cycles of that are now much more shortened and hopefully a lot more legible, if we sort of adopt more of like a systems mindset to testing it, just like software engineering has. So yeah, like I'm not sure if that's also like something that like you've like how you kind of would describe that same trend, but that's how I see it, at least from a more technical background.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of inertia in any discipline, right? I think, and there's certain focus areas and there's certain priorities, and you're given your KPIs for the quarter from your manager, and like AI optimization isn't one of them, for example, right? Or optimizing, the results of your AI agent, or of your tool that you're using, right? Um, and I think that that's changing, and but progress is slow, right? And um, there's going to be more and more of, I totally agree with you, it's going to be more and more of a technical role. One of the guests we had on the CX files, Andrew Rios, he was talking about how there's this opportunity for support operations and support engineers. There's kind of these
Yes.
developing roles in the support space. To your point earlier, I think there is a shift that's happening, and the skills that are required to really get great results are going to be a totally different set of skills compared to what they have been, or at least a lot of them are going to be different skills. That's kind of where I see things going as well. I agree with Andrew on that, and I think that's kind of to what you're talking about as well.
Yes, for sure.
I wanted to start to head towards the end of the episode here, but Um, what do you kind of see as the future, right? There's a lot of changes that are happening in a short time. I think AI agents are going to be huge across business and in the consumer realm as well. Where do you see AI agents going, and where do you see the kind of the gaps and opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's never a dull moment right now. Like every time a foundation models company like releases something new, like Claude or Anthropic just came out with the citations API, for example, which I think is huge. I think like that's what everyone wants to see when it comes to like us seeing how the AI is making its sausage, like if you will. So whether or not you can actually trust it or not. I mean, I feel like announcements like that are happening like almost like every week or every month, like at this point. So where we see it going is, I think in the short term, I think we see that almost like every customer support leader that we're talking to right now, like has is thinking about ways to use AI, like within their customer support, like as workflows. And I think it starts with basic deflection. That makes sense for a lot of the ticket drivers that people have.
Hmm.
But I think, even maybe later this year, and there are companies that are already doing this, you have more this idea of more sophisticated agents that are able to actually reach into internal systems about the customer and check maybe a bunch of different data sources, either summarize that findings like to like the human customer support agent in case it's a really sensitive or escalated issue, or maybe even just respond to the customer directly for more of sort of like a full service workflow. I think these agents will be able to take actions as well. I think for the e-commerce example, it seems pretty well scoped, and that already exists today. Where you write into an agent and say, "Hey, I want to unsubscribe," and they're like, "Cool, like they'll do it for you." I don't know how many companies actually want to make their unsubscription process that great. I think that's always like a holy war when it comes to consumers and companies. But you get the idea. I feel like the action space, if you will, of what an agent can do, it makes sense for like an e-commerce company. I think what will be exciting to see is maybe more B2B SaaS companies or more complex like e-commerce companies or marketplaces, for example, like Airbnb, like etc. Adopt AI agents that can take actions on your behalf. Because I think in general we might see conversational UIs, chatbots, just being another extension of the product that people are interacting with. Um, so, um, so I think that's another trend is like agents taking more sophisticated actions, and as a result, customers may be expecting that more, honestly, and maybe even engineering and product and design teams not shifting as much as like how do we build like this great dashboard with these buttons and everything so the customer can log into a portal and do these things themselves. I think they might actually think about, well, what if the interface for how a customer does this action is just by asking, like support or an AI agent to do it for them within the platform. I think that's definitely a medium term thing.
Hmm.
And then I think the long term thing is interesting. I think it's like, you know, um, it's hard to say. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think the longer term thing is that I think we're going to start seeing a much more of a dissolution of the support operations and product sort of roles within a company, and more of a merging between them. Andrew Rios, that was a great point about support operations. I think that it'll be. I think the companies, 3 4 years from now. There will be different job titles. I'm not exactly sure what they will be yet, but I don't think they're going to fall within the same disciplines that we see today necessarily. So those are my hot takes.
No, I
What do
think, yeah,
you think?
that's great. I mean, the was it the OpenAI operator, which can control the browser, right?
Yeah,
You can have your own AI agent that can use the web browser for you, and then in that world, assuming that this takes off, in that world you've got a totally different interface with every business, right? You have your own personal shopper, personal problem solver that goes and talks to support for you, right? um, so you might be AI agent talking to AI agent, right, in the
that's what I
chat.
was gonna say. Yeah, no, I think like, and I think it's interesting because I do think that's already happening with some call centers where, there's those SaaS, those like subscription platforms where you can say like, hey, go and like call blank and then like cancel the thing for me. So that's definitely happening on the consumer side. Definitely that's happening on the business side as well right now. I can totally see both of them talking to each other. And I wonder who would win that deadlock. in some cases. But I also think that's going to be something that we see a lot more of in the next few years too.
Yeah, I think, and that reminds me, there's one more question or one more topic here I'd like to close out with, and it's this idea that AI depends on quality data, right?
Mm,
Essentially, and it has to be in the right structure, and it has to be relevant and timely, and um, in the general, in the broader AI space, there's all these models that are being trained on all this data on the internet. They're also generating articles and tweets, and they're generating content as well. And so there's this idea that there's going to be like an AI apocalypse when all the content is being generated by AIs, and then it's just there's nothing new to train on, and it's just kind of this garbage cycle going around, right? um,
totally,
and
totally.
AI can generate some good stuff, but um, within a business, if you have an AI agent talking to an AI agent, and they're both pulling from imperfect data, then it's kind of a nonsense conversation. It doesn't have a good conclusion, or maybe the wrong thing happens, or you know one bad thing triggers another bad thing, and so on. um, what do you think about this kind of idea of knowledge management and like accurate, timely knowledge for AI?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think that when I say AI agent today, I think the sensible way to build that is actually likely a bunch of smaller AI functions that are part of a decision tree that is much more tightly controlled by the business. So maybe just to throw an example out there to make a and I'm throwing this example out there because I think this example should hopefully make it like more defensible against this risk that you're mentioning, which I think is a very fair risk to bring up. But I don't know if it's something where it's like uh, you know let's say it's Airbnb, for example. You say like maybe a host asks you to cancel your booking because they got the dates wrong. That's happened to me a few times. It's pretty frustrating. And then like you try to talk to the host and they're being unreasonable. Then you reach out to support and you say, hey, like the host is asking me to cancel, but then I'm going to be subject to this crazy refund policy that I only get half my money back. Like, can you help? And so if I were to break that down into set of functions, I don't think I would. I think one approach would be like throw in all the information ever about Arthur, all the other information out there about the host, maybe even public information about them as well, and ask the AI agent to make a decision,
Mhm.
which I think is really, really risky. And instead, I would break that down into like maybe asking first, like, is Arthur a good guest in general? Does he have good ratings? Is he responsive to hosts for the most of the time? Has he had this sort of history of maybe like saying boy who's cried wolf, if you will, to Airbnb support to like fraudulently get back more money out of a refund or not, the works. And I think the same sort of analysis happens on the host side as well. And then another analysis should happen on the messages exchanged. And then another analysis should happen on sort of like of course, like the details of the space and the refund policy and everything like that. And sounds like a bit of a contrived example, but this is how I would sort of break that down into a bunch of individual steps. So it's really not just AI making this black and white decision, trying to sort of work with like all of this crazy context information. I think that the hard work to be done really is kind of deducing, what are those individual components or inputs to a decision, having AI make a bunch of mini decisions along the way, being able to fully trace through that and audit that later. If you're like a support operations, analyst like at Airbnb, and you'll see how it handled like Arthur's case. So I think when you look at it in that way, each one of those decision points should be, and breaking it up should make it a lot more defensible, I think, to the possibility of like total crap feeding into all these systems. And at the end of the day, most of this will come from first party data that the company has. And so I think that's where just making like good database design, like and like good data hygiene, that is usually cut off from outside influence of AI anyways. I think that risk should be a lot more controlled. That's how I see it. It takes a lot more effort to do it that way in order to make it right. But I think that's the sort of work that needs to happen at least for the next like year or two to make AI agents actually work in production the way that you want them to and reliably. But I don't know. Who knows? OpenAI could also come out with like, hey, like our bot can now read like the entire Library of Alexandria 30 times over and memorize everything about it and make the right decision. In which case I will swallow my words and maybe we should adopt a slightly different. Maybe you can try to get to the same outcome with less work. But I'm pretty worried about that. I'm worried that that would actually happen or not, and not be subject to all the crap that might be out there on the public internet.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Arthur, there's a ton of questions here. There's a ton of things I'd like to ask you about. We could go on and on about this AI subject. Um, I want to close out the episode here, and just ask you on a final note. Do you have any tips or advice for people who are looking at AI tools? They're trying to evaluate their options. They're trying to make a good decision. What are some things that you would tell them to look out for, or that you would recommend that they pay special attention to?
Totally. I think that the way it's never going to be this all-in-one project where you just like turn on the AI and it works. I think of when you're evaluating other, especially vendors, I think you need to ask about what their proof of concept process looks like. And then for us, and I'm sure other companies do this too. What we do is we'll look at your ticket volume or tickets like for the past like few weeks, and then put a proof of concept together and start back testing the results against how people actually answer that question over the past month. And that's one way to sort of build confidence in the system. And I think the important thing is just like find ways to build confidence in the system, so it's not this like huge surprise like whether or not like something may not work out like after maybe a crazy expensive implementation 6 months from now. I think the results should be very obvious to you, like every week, if like a system is getting better or not, because at the end of the day, that's how you're going to be using it in production. You're going to be monitoring this AI system every week to see if it's working good or not. And so I think what to look for in vendors is look for ones where they take steerability and monitoring as uh, one of their most important parts about their product, because I think that's actually is what it takes to get it to work, as opposed to any point in time like, oh yeah, the AI did a good answer today. Like no, it's almost more of like the meta systems question, like how do you know that it's like going to work over time. So that's one thing I'd look out for, just like POCs that have that as like part of the deal and not just this big like talent show reveal at the end.
All right, Arthur, great. It's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you for coming. That's all for the CX files on this episode, and we'll catch you on the next one. All right, bye.
Yeah.